Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Simmons. I am the Audience Development and Engagement Manager at Leicester Museums. I'd like to welcome everybody. I am the senior officer at Leicester Museums, responsible for public programs and collections. I've worked in the museum sector for 30 years now. I started my career at Sheffield, and I've worked in the Northeast and in the Midlands for quite a long time now, mostly in public outreach, collections management, curatorial services, those sorts of things. What I'd like to do tonight is look through the amazing art collection that we have at Leicester Museums and Galleries. The Museum Services collection started in 1859. We are one of the oldest museum services in the country, and we are the oldest free to all museum service in Britain. You've never had to pay admission or be a member to come into Leicester Museum at all over that period of time. So in terms of our art collection, the thing that we're the thing that we are best known for is our German Expressionist collections. We have now over 500 artworks by the German Expressionists. And the German Expressionism was a movement that started really in the Edwardian period, but picked up pace after the First World War, where, particularly in Germany and Central Europe, artists wanted to express emotion through very dynamic artworks, where they rejected realism and wanted to show through strong brushstrokes and bright colours and very powerful emotive subjects their feelings, to make people think about the events around them and to make them feel that they could think about changing things. So a state of mind rather than a sort of an art movement or anything theoretical in itself. Choosing a piece of work to sort of give you an idea about the quality of our collection, I've chosen Ernst Nuschel's Black Mother. Now, Black Mother, excuse me, doesn't it always go wrong? Black Mother is a work that was painted by Nuschel in 1931. Ernst Nuschel was Jewish. He was born in what's now the Czech Republic, and went to study at the Art Institute the Art Academy in Berlin, where he became a member of the November Group, which was a radical movement, radical socialists who were looking to sort of counterbalance the Weimar, the rise of fascism within the Weimar Republic. He wanted to, he got influenced by artists like Oskar Kokoschka, Ludwig Minder, but his work in the 1920s became very much focused on powerful and provocative paintings of ordinary people, ordinary workers, black people, gypsies, and the unemployed, people who were marginalized by the German state. This painting of Black Mother is one of the very few surviving works of this period in his life. Some people find it quite evocative. They find it quite dramatic. The breastfeeding Black Mother is, of course, a reference to the idea of the Black Madonna, so there's a religious overtone to it, as well as it being an act of defiance. There were 24,000 Africans living in Germany in the 1930s. They had a population of about 65 million, and they were seen as degenerates, as worthless people, subhuman by the Nazi regime. And Nuschel, through this artwork, was trying to show the dignity of motherhood, but also a sense of defiance. And I think you get that personally for looking at the mother's face and the way that the baby and the mother's eyes connect with the viewer in a very sort of positive way. Newshall, of course, just 2 years later, Newshall's work was seized from an exhibit, and many of his works burnt publicly outside of the display hall where they were being exhibited. And again in 1937, several of his works were, which were on exhibition in his hometown of Aussig, were vandalised and disfigured with swastikas. He'd also just recently been in the Soviet Union, where he had been painting workers and doing portraits of commissions for Stalin and Dmitrov. He realised that there was a serious threat towards his life, so fled the Nazis on the last train out to Czechoslovakia in 1937, arriving as a refugee in London just before the outbreak of the war. Newshall's wider family were all murdered in the Holocaust. Newshall's work today is very rare. This painting was part of a donation in the 1990s to the service. Now, why does Leicester have so many German expressionist works? Well, in 1943, Trevor Thomas, the then director of the New Walk Museum, was friends with a number of emigre and refugee artists, including the Hess family, who had a massive collection of fantastic expressionist works. And he persuaded the museum authorities to put on an exhibition called Mid-European Art, which was the first exhibition of the German expressionists in this country. Extremely popular. In 1943, an unusual time to be holding a major exhibition of German artwork. He wanted to show that there was culture that was beyond what stereotypes of the Nazi and beyond warfare, and that really was the founding spark for the collection of our works, which were bought from that exhibition and have been collected up to the modern day and form an extremely important part of our collection. Moving along, something a little bit more traditional, although this is a recent acquisition, purchased in 2019. This is William Wollaston and his family in a grand interior, sometimes called the Wollaston family. It is a conversation piece, a painting of the early 18th century, where you are the patron is wanting to show his family and to show off all his friends to his rich mates. So what do I say about Hogarth? Hogarth is well known as an illustrator, as a person doing caricatures, which come out of his early training as an engraver. But when he joined the Academy of the Society painter James Thornhill in 1724, he sort of became able to open the door to polite society. And Hogarth began to receive commissions for these family group portraits. Very fashionable on the continent, and this became a really fashionable thing for people in London to also pick up. Hogarth's works, and this example has got a slightly more English taste to it in terms of the style. The Wollaston family portrait shows William Wollaston, who is a wealthy landowner, with large estates in Leicestershire and Suffolk. He's the figure in black with the white cravat in the centre piece. His money was made in coal and in sheep farming, in wool. But by this time, 1730, he also had major investments and would eventually serve as the governor of the Bank of England. His wife Elizabeth is on the right. She sits on the table, sits near the table, with the teapot, tea and things spread out around her to show that she's the hostess. And all their friends sit in what is their apartments at Charterhouse Square in London. The detail in here is really just to show, again, that you're rich and famous and how important you are. Now, This painting belonged to the Walton family and has been on loan to the museum for about 70 years, but was acquired partly in terms of for tax reasons, inheritance reasons, by us in 2019. It's unconserved, so you'll notice in this photograph of the work that the detail is quite dull. Now, if you look over to left-hand side, in the background there is a figure. This is a black servant, and he is wearing a beautiful livery in bright blue and gold, although really what you see is sort of murky colours. He's holding up a teacup to one of the unidentified friends who are the Farquhar family. Francis, in blue at the front, became governor of the Founding Hospital, and the lady with the open fan, who I believe is sitting nearby, just behind him, is Sarah Johnson, a wealthy heiress. All friends of the family, but lots of the details, including the background details, the detail of their unidentified servant, the other servant who's standing behind William, are hopefully going to be revealed, as this year we'll be launching a funding campaign to be able to have this work conserved and to be able to display it in its full splendour. Now, we have 1.5 million objects in the museum collection. You can imagine a museum like Leicester has been collecting for such a long time that you accumulate absolutely thousands of amazing objects. One of the things that is very notable about our collection is an underrepresentation of women artists. That tends to be because of the collecting started in the 1850s. But I thought that we would have a look at maybe some of our one of our more famous female artists, and this is Three Clowns, The Three Clowns by Laura Knight. Now, Dame Laura Knight, I think, is obviously an English artist working in oils and on watercolours, who really broke into the traditional male establishment in the 1920s. Created a dame in 1929, and I think in 1936 became the second woman elected to be a full membership of the Royal Academy. Her large retrospective exhibition at the Royal Academy in 1965 was the first to be offered to a woman. Notice it took them 30 years to get around to that. Knight was known for painting people that she found interesting in the theatre, particularly performers and people in the ballet, but she was also interested in people on the margins. She was very interested by the circus, and then in the Second World War by woodworkers and people leading up to producing works from the water crimes trial in Nuremberg. She was also also produced a series of works of Romany people, and would go to race courses and invite Romanys into sort of a portable studio and paint their portraits. Her interest in the circus was formed in the 20s, as I said, when she attended Bertram Mills Circus in West London, became enamoured of the circus. This produced a number of major paintings. This one was produced in 1929. Knight decided that she would spend an entire year drawing scenes from daily life in the Big Top. So she decided to join the Mills and Carmo Circus Company and live with them for the majority of 1929 on tour, traveling around with them, producing sketches and really sort of documenting their everyday lives. Hence the sort of realism in this painting. These clowns are sort of discussing a performance, an everyday scene. It's painted up from a sketch that she took from life. And her friends Randy on the left, Marber with his black top hat on, and Joe Burt, who was an acrobat and a famous London clown. She made a number of friends who stayed with her throughout her life from this period of time when she's painting realistic scenes of everyday life. Now, one thing about Leicester is that Leicester is the most diverse city in the country. According to the Office of National Statistics, we have not only the most diverse communities in the country, but we also have some of the most diverse roads. So Narborough Road in Leicester is famous for being the most ethnically diverse road, has over 25 different nationalities owning and running shops in its extent, and is quite famous for its diversity of foods and languages and different lifestyles. Our collection does reflect that as well, as we have over the last 30 years been collecting items painted by local artists and makers. And I thought this was a really interesting example. This is a small hunting scene by Ramkrishnan Sharma. Now, Ramkrishnan Sharma was working in Britain, is a lesser known artist, better known in his native India, was studying in Britain and had a number of shows in the 90s and early 2000s where he was showing some of his work. He's a contemporary Indian artist, employs the ancient art methods of the miniaturists of the city of Krishnagar, which is in West Bengal. This painting is about A4 size, and it's painted onto silk, which gives it a very delicate quality if you sort of look at it physically, which is a tradition of miniaturist painting in Bengal, which has been passed down over the generations from grandfather to son, to passing down through the families. And it's typical of the traditional religious and pastoral works that inspired the Indian modernists, people like Rabindranath Tagore, to establish the Bengal School of Art. And the Bengal School of Art sought to reclaim Indian art from the European influences that it had gained during British rule, to try to look back to the past and to traditional Indian art, but create something that was uniquely Indian, South Asian in scope, particularly after the independence in 1947. And again, Ram's work here is reflecting back on that tradition, but also reflecting on the tradition that the modernists had. Ram currently teaches works in Jaipur. And this work was exhibited, was one of his entries to the People's Exhibition, the Open Exhibition, held in Leicester in 2001, and was purchased by the museum by the City of Leicester Museums Trust. The City of Museums Leicester Trust exists to raise money for the purchase of artworks in order to help diversify our collection, and has recently helped us buy works by a number of artists, including black artists in the city, to help to better reflect our local communities and the breadth of skill and artistry that exists in local communities. Now here's one of our local lads, one of our local favourites, David Attenborough. This is a portrait by Brian Organ. Brian is a Leicester-based artist. This painting sits in our geology gallery. Sometimes people wonder why, obviously, David Attenborough, naturalist, scientist, television personality, but people sometimes wonder, why is that in the geology gallery? Well, Very close to where this painting is on display is a remarkable fossil that is 500 million years old, called Charna. The best way I can describe Charna is that it looks like a cross between a cactus and a strange sea cucumber. It's not quite a plant. It wasn't quite an animal. It's a sort of a very bizarre sort of fossil that was found in Leicestershire in 1957. And this fossil inspired a very young David to follow his lifelong interest in fossils and in the natural world. During the opening of our geology gallery 10 years ago, Sir David said, and I've got a quote here, of the museum, that of course I wanted to know what the fossils that I found out, I found while out in the countryside were. So I brought them to the museum. The influence of the museum has a profound effect on my career. David he grew up nearby. He spent most of his childhood looking into the museum, visiting our services. The Attenboroughs have a very long history of supporting Leicester museums. David and Richard Attenborough, John's father, Frederick, was a patron of the first exhibition of German Expressionist artworks in 1944 that we talked about a little bit earlier, while Lord Richard and Lady Attenborough donated their amazing collection of ceramics by Picasso to the museum in 2007, and they're on display in their own gallery. So the Attenboroughs themselves have played an important role in the modern museum. Brian's work is exquisite in the detail that he draws and uses in his works, and has been very active, and is famous for, I suppose, his paintings of his portrait work of Royal Highness Princess Margaret in 1970 that was some people found unflattering, but which caused controversy at the time, but was loved by the princess herself. And his paintings of Diana, Princess of Wales, his portrait of His Royal Highness Charles, Prince of Wales, Alan Sugar, President Mitterrand, and recently Bill Gates and other people. We're lucky enough to have two of his works, this one of Sir David and a beautiful painting of his brother Richard, in the same style, with Richard's film posters and his various film roles and memorabilia in exquisite detail behind. Now, trying to pick six works to talk about in half an hour from a collection as massive as ours is always going to be tricky, and you can't represent everything. So I decided I'd choose a guilty pleasure, sort of to finish us off this evening, as we only have, unfortunately, a short period of time together in which to sort of briskly zoom through a few tasters of what your collection can be. This is Charles Green, Charles Green, who's an interesting artist. He's not that well known, now. In the later Victorian period, he was quite famous because he was the illustrator for a number of newspapers, including the Graphic, but particularly well known for being an illustrator for Charles Dickens. After Dickens's stories were printed in the newspapers, they were bound into commercial volumes. Charles Green, as an illustrator, illustrated The Old Curiosity Shop, Great Expectations, and the first book publication of A Christmas Carol. So he was very well known as to the Victorians. They'd seen his work absolutely everywhere. He's less well known as a painter. This is, I suppose, his best known painting, which has been in the collection since it was bought after being exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1886. This is his work, The Girl I Left Behind Me, a military painting, but it's not designed by Green to be something that is a historical piece. It's all for Green. Everything is about emotion and about what he's trying to show. So there's lots of historical inaccuracies in this painting. The Girl I Left Behind Me is a traditional folk song. in which a soldier laments the fact that he's going to war and he'll never see his sweetheart again. It's been dated now to probably the Elizabethan period, and probably earlier. It's been used and sung by lots of different places in lots of different countries, particularly by soldiers as they go or march to war. This painting was painted 70 years after the events depicted. This is British soldiers saying goodbye to their loved ones before they head off to the ships across to Belgium and then to eventually the Battle of Waterloo. And sometimes I think people see this as a militaristic, imperialist work, which is very easy to see why. But there is also a very strong stand of criticism and sentimentality in this as well. Charles Green seems to have mostly worked with people with a strong social conscience. There's full of emotional detail in here. You can see the girl in the centre clinging to a lover, the slightly disparaging look of the soldier on the left-hand side, the excited position, for example, of the excited children running in the foreground, with the faces of the drummer boys over on the left-hand side. Drummer boy has this sort of concerned look, not certain what's going to be happening, and you've got the older men sort of reprimanding perhaps some of the more exuberant, experienced men. This is a painting about the sorrow of war. So while some people see it as a celebration of men going off to fight, aren't they brave and glorious, the faces of the families left behind, looking at their loved ones, possibly the last time, is deliberate and evokes a sense of loss that sometimes we forget is present in this type of sentimental Victorian artwork. It's a massive work. The figures are almost life-size and have amazing sets of detail. Although I wouldn't say that it's everybody's taste. For me personally, it demonstrates that the illustrator's art can have that emotional effect in the similar way that the German Expressionists would have some 50 years later. So, I mean, that's a whistle-stop tour through some of the highlights of our collection. I could have picked hundreds of other artworks, that's obvious, in the collection, and I would encourage you, if you're interested in German Expressionist works, to have a look, to just search for German Expressionist or German Expressionism Leicester, and you will find our website on which we have all pictures of every single Expressionist work in our collection, over 500 of them, plus information, lectures, and original material, including the original catalogues that we have in the collection that you can peruse it and have a look at those yourselves. We have a beautiful permanent number of art galleries within Leicester Museum and Art Gallery. Admission is, of course, free. We have a traditional art gallery, our Picasso collections, and our German Expressionist works on permanent display. Next year, we will be expanding to a new gallery with where we'll be able to show you more of our contemporary works. And at the end of every year, in November and December, we have two long-standing exhibitions of work, one of which is the Open Exhibition, which is the People's Exhibition, and our partnership with the Leicester School of Artists that has been going on for over 150 years, where the Leicester Leicester Society of Artists, the LSA, have had their annual exhibition with us. So if you're an art lover, there's a lot to see here in Leicester. So everybody, thank you very much for listening on what is a very, very windy night. The storm rages outside. I wish you all to have a nice, peaceful evening. I'd like to thank Art UK for making this talk possible and for the support of Bloomberg Philanthropies. And I'd like to thank Amy Murphy, who is the technical person at Art UK, for her assistance in getting us online tonight. Thank you very much, and please do come and visit us in Leicester. There's an amazing world of things for you to discover at our museums.